for me, I see language as like a dressing up box as a child. You can pick out different clothing and put them on at different times. Sometimes you might choose to wear, and you might find a piece of clothing that you really like, and you think, oh, I'm really going to wear this clothing more often and speak like this in this manner, or use these words. Because I just find that's what I love about sort of arts in general, is like you have such a rich tapestry of all of these things that you can play with.
Welcome to Growing Inspiration, the podcast that celebrates beauty, wisdom, and creativity through the timeless traditions of the liberal arts. I'm your host, Shana McLean. Each episode features thought-provoking conversations with scholars, artists, and creative thinkers who help us explain our place in the world. Together we'll explore how the classical liberal arts, from literature, writing, and art, to history, philosophy, science, and music, continue to shape innovative thinking today and contribute to the richness of our lives. I'm thrilled that you've joined me today for a conversation with Thomas Finch, creator of English Enjoyed, the channel dedicated to exploring formal British English as an art form. Our conversation covers language evolution, the beauty of Victorian prose, the balance between prescriptivism and descriptivism, and how we can all be a little more intentional with our word choices. Hello, Thomas. I'm so glad to have you with me today on Growing Inspiration, and I'm sure our listeners will be very interested to get to know you a little bit better, your background and creative journey. Your videos on English Enjoyed are as educational as they are entertaining. And so can you give our listeners a little bit of an idea of your background and how you came, jumping in, how you came to English Enjoyed and began that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely go into that as the long story, but for a succinct version, I'm an actor, writer, filmmaker by trade, and I was looking for a way to, support myself and support living, and I studied for a TEFL course, so that's teaching English as a foreign language, and the intention was very much to teach English abroad or online. And as a result of that journey in itself, that mini journey, English Enjoyed was born as a way to just explore the joys of learning, well, any language really, but obviously I was teaching English, and I wanted to share the parts of English and the facets of that language that I enjoyed the most. And through my sort of videos now and educational content, I hope I'm sharing content that resonates with people and is as entertaining, as you say, as it is educational.
Mm-hmm. And I know, I've studied some foreign languages as well, and it's an interesting contrast when you start learning the bits and pieces and how to learn a language, and then you come back to your own. How did that kind of illuminate English for you after you started getting into, I think you studied French and now Spanish, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So I studied French at university, about over sort of 15 years ago now. And so I've been speaking that language, and it's part of who I am. And only last year I decided to pick up Spanish, sort of as a language that I really wanted to learn, to the point where, I could have conversations and things like that. Because I've dabbled with other languages in the past. I've tried a little bit of Japanese, a little bit of Greek. I did a year of German while I was at university, but I have let that fall by the wayside. The good news is Spanish was a choice, kind of an intentional choice, but also it's very similar to French, so it has been very easy for me to pick up. But it's amazing how much of a whole new world that language has opened up, because obviously it is spoken by almost half the world, and so it's amazing. That's what I love about language, is that it opens you into these different ways of seeing the world and communicating with the world and being in a community with the world.
Is your experience with learning French and learning other languages kind of what made you so interested in grammar to begin with, or is that something that goes way back to your childhood?
I think we are not taught our own language in the same way that we are when we learn another language. And I think that's both a shame and a crime, just because I think it's very interesting at least that's been my experience. Maybe other people, and at different generations, you have a different experience. But I would argue that some people and some generations might not even be able to identify the verb in a sentence or an adjective. And that's not to shame anyone. It's more just to say, oh, but then when you come to learn a new language, it makes it harder, because then you have to learn grammar on top of that. So my experience was, learning about conjugations of verbs. That's not something you think about as someone when you speak your native language. You think, what does that even mean, the conjugation of verbs? And English tenses they do tend to be very simple in their conjugations. So we have the benefit there, but their usage and in which cases we use different tenses is more, I say, more complex in English. But I think that's where my passion comes from, is that I want to share with people the intricacies of English so that hopefully they feel inspired to investigate their own language themselves, if it is indeed English, that's their native or mother tongue. And if it's not, that they then think, oh, what about Russian or Spanish or Mandarin? Like, what is it about my own language that I can learn from having looked at another language in the same way? And I'm definitely not a stickler for proper grammar, as in I definitely am not. This might upset some people. I'm not a prescriptivist. I don't say this is the one only true way to speak something. I'm definitely a descriptivist. I believe language grows and evolves, and it should do, because that's what keeps a language alive and rich. But there are qualities and styles of speaking and of language that I enjoy most. And that's obviously what you see more on my channel, is that kind of very, I would say, like descriptive, eloquent, or what is perceived as eloquent, a way of speaking. And I want to be careful to say that when I say in my videos, oh, this is the correct way or the right way, it is just, there's no, absolute truth in language. Like, everything is made up, all words are made up. And we have just collectively agreed upon that this is the most standard way to say this at this point in time. And so,
really wonderful point. Yes.
Yeah, I want to be very careful to say, because I'm never coming at it from a point of shaming people for not knowing something or superiority, because I learn every day about English, and it's a never-ending journey. It's a lifelong journey, whatever language you learn. Mm-hmm. And so, when I say, oh, something is correct or right, I'm just saying that is the kind of perceived standard and the most understood way to be understood at the moment when you're communicating in this language. However, that could evolve and change as time goes on.
That's a really good point. And now, it seems to be that your favorite kind of era, it seems to be the Victorian era for language. And can you tell us about your book that you've put together about Victorian writers?
Yeah, I've got a little hiding here in the background. So it's Victorian Writers Then and Now. And it's very much a tongue-in-cheek look at the verbosity in which Victorian writers are perceived for communicating. We look at their language now and we think, oh God, it's so rich and flowy and flowery and long sentences and sweeping passages, lots of commas and semicolons, and all of this richness in the descriptive language as well. And I love that, because they're the sort of stories and writing that I enjoy reading most, and that style at least, because I love the depth, what I believe is a perceived more depth and richness in that language. And I think there are so many words and adjectives, so to speak, that are maybe lost, or maybe even nouns that are lost nowadays, because as time's moved on, we don't use such a broad vocabulary as we maybe once had or had exposure to. And I don't necessarily know the reason for that. People could say, oh, it's because people aren't reading as much anymore, but we are still consuming a lot of written content online, I would say. But they're the kind of things that I enjoy the most. And so it's that precision you sometimes get in a language that I enjoy most. And that seems to be, there's a lot of that in the Victorian era, I would say. The Victorian era is definitely either side of it. So early Victorian, late Victorian, more the Regency period as well. And anything around that it's, I think there was a richness there in that language, and not just in English. Probably it seemed, at least across Europe, there was the La Belle Époque in France, which was this explosion of industrial period that was going on as well. And it just seems to be a period that maybe I'm romanticizing it, but I definitely enjoy it. And that's also to say that there are writers today whose writing I do like, and who use a similar sort of quality that I find in those more classical texts as well. So it's not just classical text, it's just a format and style of writing that I resonate with.
So for our listeners' educational information, the Victorian period was during the reign of Queen Victoria, 1837 to 1901, and it can be kind of squished one way or the other. Can you give an example of some of the Victorian writers that you most particularly like, and then some of the modern writers that you feel carry that?
Yeah, I mean, I very much like some of the the big name classics. Charles Dickens is a favorite of mine.
I'm trying to remember, would H.G. Wells have been in that period?
I'm not sure if that, I've got in the back. So George Eliot would be another one. Oscar Wilde, of course, even though he's written plays as well, but fantastic whimsical writer. And I very much enjoy, even though some of them were around this time or before it, the Jane Austen. Love Jane Austen. But the Bronte sisters as well, some of those stories are fantastic as well. So these are big name writers, and they are the sort of in the classical canon. And I'd say one of my favorite modern writers is Hanya Yanagihara, who wrote her most famous book is A Little Life. And she since wrote To Paradise and has another first book as well. But her writing for me has a richness and a quality and depth that I honestly haven't found since reading more of those classical writers.
Wow. Have to check that one out. How did your background, I know you have also, you said you are trained in acting and also in ballet. How does that inform your videos that you do for English Enjoyed? And please also talk about your new series, The Murder of Mistakes.
Oh, yes. So yeah, I, after university, went to drama school, trained as an actor. And it is something I still do today. I very much grew up as an actor as well. So I first performed when I started performing when I was 10, in community theatre. I've done a host of plays, done touring, and the stage and that sort of exposure to lots of different texts, specifically play texts. I think actors are and people who are involved in the theatre are like lovers of language. I think you have to be, and you're not only forced to read, but to perform and to be in communication with other people around language. And so that's what it inspires me. It lights me up. It makes me feel alive. And I think obviously that informs that as my sort of channel in the English Enjoyed sphere has grown, I've actually pulled more of that acting into it because I thought, oh, this is a unique skill that I have. Why not bring more of that in a way that I can leverage it to hopefully make my videos more interesting, make language more interesting, and make the educational side of things more interesting as well. And so, yes, I have that string to my bow. I also have done ballet, which actually started very late in life. I started at 25. I have taken a sort of extended break from it at the moment, just because life has gotten busy and some things have to fall by the wayside. But I very much enjoy going to see that as well as doing it. But it is something that I've always been aware that I enjoy since I was quite young, but just never had the opportunity to sort of participate in it myself until later in life. But I love classical ballet. I mean, there's such a repertoire there of, again, hugely well-known pieces like The Nutcracker, Zell, Sleeping Beauty, so these big sweeping archaic or archetypal stories. And I'm very privileged here in London to have one of the premier best ballets and ballet companies in the world, the Royal Ballet. And I've also seen many other ballets around the world. But the classical repertoire they have, for me, it's just about down to the costumes, the sets and everything. It's such an incredible world building experience when you go to see these things. And ballet itself is, if you've ever done it, I would say it's very simple, incredibly hard to master, and the professionals make it look flawless and easy and effortless. Right. And it has a grammar of its own in a way. There's first, fifth, position, sixth. Your arms have certain positions where they should be. So you have this, again, you have this structure which you can play in, but then can be broken or expanded and modulated as you wish. But it's, again, that structure that I think allows you to sort of go look at something and go, oh, that's classical ballet. They're really sort of hitting that fifth position. Right. In the same way, I think that language can sometimes replicate that as well. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not about this is the right or any way to dance. It's just what resonates with me. And I've seen many contemporary ballets or many contemporary dance that I like just as much. And so, yeah, I'm trying to bring all of those strings basically into English Enjoyed to elevate it, hopefully, in a way that is just... It is a very whimsical world I hope I'm creating. And which brings me to, yes, A Murder of Mistakes, which is, I don't want to say it's a course because people have been asking me, do you teach classes? Do you do courses? And I do have a small amount of bandwidth for teaching online. But I knew that I didn't necessarily want to create a a lengthy online course, because I feel that there's a lot of people who buy courses, and me myself included, that you have all the best intentions, but you don't necessarily get around to completing. And I thought, how can I leverage something a bit more long form in a way that will be just as interesting and educational as the short form videos that I tend to do? And so I created a 40 episode murder mystery. It's essentially it's one long film, but broken up into 40 episodes. And each episode teaches you a particular element or part of English, so that you can really focus in on that one topic for that one episode. It was a joy to film. At the moment, well, as you'll see in the series, I do play all the characters. That is not how I'd like to necessarily do the everything in my business the rest of my life. I do want to take on more, I guess I would say, actors or performers as well. But for now, just with the bandwidth of what I've got, it was more of a practical choice to do that.
What is fascinating about your work in particularly in Murder of Mistakes, but also in your other videos where you have the two characters, is the distinctive characteristics and voice that you're able to give each version of yourself in these. How did you go about building those character profiles, or how did you see these different people and then embody them?
I think it's they're very much. I'll take that in two parts. So the one that is mainly just me speaking to myself, the short form videos I do, they are very just archetypal characters, I would say, in that one is someone who might have more superior knowledge, and one is also not superior, but one might have more knowledge of a certain subjects, and the other is maybe it's like a student teacher scenario. But I never say which one is, and sometimes it might be one teaching the other.
Right.
But I want to play off that enjoyment of, or to the heritage of British understatement, and that's those subtle sort of, for want of a better word, digs at each other, and the way in which you can communicate something without exactly saying it. And so I just wanted it to be playful, and that's hopefully what keeps people engaged, is that sort of playful game of tennis between these two characters, is where you're just seeing them trying to sort of outmatch each other or undermine each other, and then also at the same time teaching each other essentially English. But then in the Murder of Mistakes, it was definitely that each character would have had a particular quality to them. So we do have the professor who, is probably the more ostensibly educational one. We have the inspector who has his eye on listening and looking out for, or his ear, should I say, looking out for mistakes. So he's very great at catching things, I would say, not necessarily always knowing how to teach necessarily what the correction is. Then we have the string of sort of suspects and suspicious characters who each have their own foibles. So one character, for instance, doesn't quite finish his sentences. He always sort of trails off in ellipses. There's another one who has a penchant for using or misusing expressions and things like that. And so each one has their sort of clumsy or telltale signs, which gives them the distinctive quality. But at the same time, it's definitely contrived in the way that these characters are making these mistakes intentionally, so that we can say, oh, this is the way to say it. Yeah. So and again, I want to be careful about using the word mistakes. It's definitely not that you're wrong if you do this, but it's just, again, this is more the standard way and the acceptable way at the moment to say it correct.
Right. Right. And why don't we talk a little bit about language evolution? I grew up on the King James Bible and Shakespeare, so a lot of my language growing up was very different from the kids that I went to school with. But when we learn in a certain way and we kind of become used to that, we tend to become a little rigid about those rules. Like, well, I know how to speak it correctly and you don't. I read a book this past year. It was James McWhorter, Words on the Move. And it was actually I felt kind of like, I don't know if I agree with you in all these things you're saying about how we should just allow these, perversions of the language to go on. But, T.S. Eliot talked about it being the way that language has to evolve. It has to keep moving or it becomes dead. What is your philosophy, or how do you see language, evolving?
There's a really, really, really good question. I love something I love talking about. And it's something that I don't necessarily, well, I mean, I'll answer it to my best of my ability, but I don't necessarily have a succinct elevator pitch sort of conception of it. But like I said, I'm a descriptivist. I believe in like language evolving, and I think that is particularly what makes English very interesting and keeps it very, well, ever growing and changing, because we don't have what some of the languages, well, for instance, I'm just picking the French language out as an example. They have the Académie Française, which kind of dictates what should be accepted and not accepted in a language. And they do try their best to enforce upon the language what should be. It doesn't always work, of course, because people go, I'm not going to listen to that. But we don't have any of that in English. And English, for better or worse, is definitely used as a language of business, I would say. It is also, used, I think, almost anywhere in the world, and it is the language that a lot of our technology is communicated in and used, and even on the back end of technology, I know the basic amount of coding, but all of that sometimes is a lot in English language. So it does have a certain dominance. But what I mean is all of that allows the language to just keep evolving, because it's constantly interacting with other languages. And so there's different dialects of English. There's always different strands, different ways of speaking. And I think all of those are valid. And to say, like I said, something is right or wrong is just someone's opinion at the end of the day. It really depends on what the intention is, I think, behind whenever you communicate. If you're wanting to order a coffee or something, or you want to get like something a bit more transactional done, then maybe a simpler, more direct language would be better. But if you're trying to communicate stories, depth, feeling, emotion, then that more sweeping, lyrical, sort of expansive language is where you can indulge in. However, there again, I want to be very careful to talk about rules. There are obviously standards by which we should adhere to, because if you misplace something in a sentence or you use the wrong conjugation, it can just sound off. You might be understood, but it can impede communication. And so I want to teach people, like I said, the sort of what is socially accepted as a standard at the moment, because that's the same that I do when I learn a language. I want to, whenever I'm learning French or now Spanish, I want to speak it to the best of my ability. And I really want to learn what is more formal, what is more colloquial, and how to sort of modulate myself in those languages as well. And so with English Nerd, I am teaching more of the formal English. So I do lean on those more standard practices. I'm not teaching you slang or the more sort of memeable language that is translating through the internet now, because a lot of that is ephemeral as well, but it's still valid. It's all valid. But however, I just love those sort of that everlasting sort of, could we say, timeless language.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that is one thing that is very apparent in these days with such quick interactions online, whether it's, on social media or through emails or texts, or, in some, business settings, people are on different chat programs with their colleagues and so forth. And how can we collectively kind of take a breath and take a moment to step back from the quick reply to maybe make it a little bit more polite or a little, or just more formal? Or how do we incorporate some of the things that you're teaching into our everyday lives?
I think it's a good question that I was kind of recently discussing with a friend in that their point was like, how do I use what's considered maybe a highbrow adjective in a sentence without the other person either feeling stupid or impeding the communication or something, because we both were lovers of language, and we were like, oh, I really love that kind of richness, descriptiveness, and I love collecting words like a magpie. And so, yeah, there are times when I think it's about, again, it comes back to intention and how you want to show up in the world. And so I am someone who, that catch-all phrase of be the change you want to see in the world. And so there will be times when even when I'm speaking to friends or composing a text message, and I think, oh, you know what? I'd really like to use a bit more formal language in this. And I try and avoid ending, say, a sentence with a preposition. Nothing wrong with it at all. But I was like, oh, by not doing that, it makes the sentence sound more formal. And I thought, oh, are they going to think I'm a bit odd? And I thought, yeah, that's okay. They may think I'm a bit odd and quirky, but for me, that's okay. At the end of the day, they'll still understand the sentence, which is great. And so I think I first got made aware that I sometimes maybe articulate myself in quirky manners, shall we say, when I was having a picnic with friends in London, and someone was asking me, I was talking about how I'm going to move house, and they were saying, where are you looking? And I just said, it doesn't really matter actually, because I work centrally, or I did at the time, and I'm kind of geographically agnostic. And my friend went, what does that mean? And another friend went, it just means you can live anywhere. And I was like, yeah, I could have said, I can live anywhere. But I thought, it's so much nicer to say geographically agnostic. And I don't mind having to explain myself. And so I think, yes, I guess my response to your question in a way is use the language you want to use. It does maybe impede communication. That person doesn't understand you, or they look at you a bit funny. Or if they're just looking at you funny, that's fine. That's their choice. But if it impedes communication, then you can say, I meant this, or this word means that. Mm-hmm. Or I would say sometimes you don't have to fully explain. If it's in an email, for instance, mm-hmm. It can be up to that person to be like, that's a new word. Let me right click it and look at that in a dictionary or something, or ask for the definition of it. It's very easy now, especially on technology, to just highlight a word and find the definition of something. And so I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, that's a very good point. And I love the kind of the two prongs of being able to communicate. The actual point of language is to be able to communicate with each other. So having the ability to get across your point, but then also I think it does, it conveys something about you when you speak, the things that the way you talk, whether it's your education, your class, or just your interests in certain things, but also to be, like you said, to be cognizant of not wanting someone to feel less than by what you say. So it can be a bit of a balance, wouldn't you say?
It can. And I think that's an interesting point you bring up about it conveys a lot about yourself, because I sometimes liken how we speak and the words we use, even our accent. Sometimes, it is a perception. It changes how we are perceived. And I kind of liken it sometimes to, and it's a bit of a crude analogy, but to clothing. Some people prefer to wear more formal clothing all of the time, and some people put it on for only formal occasions. And I think it's just, for me, I see language as like a dressing up box as a child. You can pick out different clothing and put them on at different times. Sometimes you might choose to wear, and you might find a piece of clothing that you really like, and you think, I'm really going to wear this clothing more often and speak like this in this manner, or use these words. Because I just find that's what I love about sort of arts in general, is you have such a rich tapestry of all of these things that you can play with. So accent's a very interesting one, because there's a lot of coded, like you said, sections of class in there, or societal expectations. And I think for someone learning English, especially as it is just for me learning, for instance, learning Spanish, so you get to choose your accent really at the end of the day, and you can change it at any point really if you want to. But for instance, I started learning a Colombian form of Spanish because the main reason was because my ex was Colombian. But it's a very different accent to, say, the mainland Spain accent. I could choose to switch back and modulate my Spanish accent when I go to Spain and have more of the th instead of the sh. Mm-hmm. But for now, I'm just consistently keeping the Colombian accent going. There's, at least what I see a lot in, and again, this is my perception just in current society, is it is perfectly acceptable, or not even, people wouldn't blink an eye if you went out on the street to purchase a coffee or something and you're wearing, say, what we call more athleisure weather, mm-hmm. like that, so, and there's again, no judgment on that. When I walk to the gym, I'm in my gym clothes. I'm not wearing a 3-piece suit. But what I feel and see is that it seems to be that's perfectly acceptable. But if someone was to walk down the street in a ball gown, or I don't know, a top hat or something, of course it's going to draw some looks by people. But I find that people would instantly make an assumption about you, that you're, I don't know, about your class, about your upbringing. And of course, there is a lot of cultural reason for that, because that used to be associated with that sort of thing. But I think nowadays I see it more as, well, I want it to be perceived as a playfulness just as much as the language is, and the way in which someone speaks, for instance. I would hate for someone to think that, oh, that person's speaking in this way because they want to assert some sort of dominance or superiority over me. And that's definitely not my intention. I just love sharing and indulging in that kind of world of language, that kind of verbosity and formality, I guess we could say.
Right.
If that makes any sense. I think I'm drawing some crude analogy.
Definitely. And I think it does come down to, not just your language, but you're also the rest of your presence too, that if you are like, well, I'm, speaking to you with, obviously trying to lord it over you, then that's a difference than just showing that you're being creative and more precise, as you pointed out previously.
Yeah, and I think precision is definitely an interesting question itself, because I was thinking about this today. One person's hot could be very different to another person's hot. And hot generally means that something is, probably quite on the warmer end of the scale. However, if I was to pass you a cup of tea or coffee and I said, oh, be careful, it's hot, you might then pick it up and go, oh, it's fine, I can drink it straight away or something. But if I passed you and said, oh, be careful, it's scalding, you might think twice about drinking it straight away. Whereas if I said, oh, it's tepid, you're thinking, okay, it's lukewarm, I can drink it straight away or something. So there's definitely precisions in which we can use language. And I think that's both a blessing and a curse, because that is where the ripeness for confusion or misunderstanding can happen, because we're both seeing the world from different perspectives, and as we all do. And we have our own opinion of what a word means sometimes. And so I just think that's just a playground for fun, really, rather than seeing that as a problem with language. I think that's a feature rather than a bug.
That's awesome. And you mentioned being able to kind of change your accent or change the way you speak in certain situations. Did you grow up in London? Have you ever had to or have you purposely changed your way of speaking based on where you were in a particular situation?
No, so I didn't grow up in London. I grew up in the northeast of the UK. I'm actually from a place called Lincolnshire. It's a big county, one of the biggest counties in the UK. Even when I mention that to some people in the UK, they go, "Where's that?" And I think it's not very well known. It's very agricultural, so it's quite big, but not not densely populated. My accent, my sort of accent growing up was slightly more what you would consider Northern British. Like I would say grass and bath rather than grass and bath. And so I had that sort of shorter A sound, but I never had a very, very, very strong, what would you say, broad Northern accent. And the reason I enjoy what people would maybe consider my accent now a more RP accent is because I just love the sound of it. I love the indulgent, there's long drawn out A sounds, because also as well, it helps me. I'm someone who does speak very fast, and it helps me slow down a little bit when I am speaking to think about that as well. But I also just like for what I perceive, the precision in that language and the articulation. It does, for me at least, requires a lot of manipulation of the tongue, the mouth and everything. And so again, it's just something I enjoy rather than anything else. But like I said, all accents, all variations of things are valid, I think. And my hope is that no one feels bad for having an accent in English or in any other language that they speak. It's definitely nothing to be ashamed of. And I make pronunciation mistakes all the time, or I'll say something a bit weird. And sometimes I think maybe I should really work on changing that. But then I think maybe that's just unique to me. I need to keep that. And maybe that's an evolution of the pronunciation language. So I think things are always evolving and changing.
Right. I've growing up as a reader, there are often words that I would read and pronounce a certain way in my head, and then find out later on that that's not really how they were normally in a standard way pronounced. So absolutely. We can all keep learning.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I've done that myself, where in some of the videos I've done, I've pronounced a word which I thought was the correct pronunciation, and someone's got, oh, actually, this is where the stress lies in that word. I think the word was irrevocable, but I said irrevocable, and they said, oh, the stress is on the first sort of
the rev.
Yeah, irrevocable, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that. And again, I took that on board as feedback of like, oh, okay, you know what, that's great. I didn't know that. I'm going to learn it, and now going forward, I'm going to try and say that. But even if I didn't, that's also okay too.
Right. Yeah, one that I think of is decorous. That
Mm,
I see decorum, so I thought it would be decorous. I got
mm.
decorous. So there are lots of things you pick up. Do you find that you are more able to express yourself fully when you're reading consistently? And what do you like to read?
Yes, absolutely. I was a voracious reader when I was growing up. I think part in due to the fact that I'm hopefully very lucky to grow up just before the very dawn of the internet sort of really taking off. And just as a child, I had more time to read. So I do find, and especially at the moment, I've made more of an intention this year and the past year to set aside time for reading, because it is something that I found that I can easily say, oh, it's not important, not urgent right now. It's important, but not urgent.
Yeah.
But it should be urgent. And the problem is as well, I've got a stack of books. I'm sure you are, that you just to read and you think, oh God, where do I even start? And what should I start on? And so sometimes I find it very hard to just commit to a book and kind of, get hooked into it and go for it. But I definitely do find that, yes, my language is, well, aided by that, of course. And you discover new words, and just different ways of expressing things. And I think it can't help but have an influence on you, the way you're thinking about language, whether you're reading a text sort of very intentionally or just more passively. I think it will have an influence on you. And I think reading is important. Well, I don't want to say it's like, well, maybe I will stand on, it will be a hill I die on and say yes. And I think it is incredibly essential and important. And I think we hopefully should be reading more long form text as well, which is and that's again what you was, I think, you're saying at some point, is like attention spans are a bit shorter, or at least it feels like everything has to be done quicker and more urgent nowadays, and there's not a lot of time for just sitting and allowing something the time it takes to be done. Everyone wants to speed read or get 6-minute abs or something. I just don't think there's a way that you can sometimes speed up a process such as reading. It is the process itself is the enjoyment.
Right. And that is so hard to do sometimes, especially, I don't know if it's as I get older, I see all these books that I still haven't gotten to, and I feel like this frantic need to read them, or if it's also a little bit of the, whether it's Goodreads or other apps that I want to read this many books this year. So you're kind of getting toward the end. You're like, well, I need to catch up with everybody else who's further ahead from me, and not being able to accept that this is my reading speed and this is how I'm going to enjoy it and take it in, and be able to slow down that way.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have to we put a lot of pressure and anxiety on ourselves about reading. It's like, oh my God, I must do more. I must or I must read quicker, or I must get more in. And I think I hope that I hope we can maybe move away from that, because it maybe destroys the pleasure of the process itself. I'm someone who actually rereads books a lot. So the author I mentioned who wrote A Little Life, I've reread that book at least 4 times, and it is not a small book. It's about 700 pages long. And the reason I reread it is because I just love the story, I love the language, and I want to live in that world, in that space, multiple times. And I think there's a great, I think it was an article, I want to say it's on the School of Life, but it could be something else. And they were talking about if you had like a stamp card with 50 stamps on that you could basically punch for, so you only had 50 more books left to read in your life.
Wow.
You might think a little bit more carefully about what you read. And what that taught me is not that I'm being necessarily intentional about what I read, but I used to be someone who, if like a completist, if I started a book, I would read it because it's important to me. I purchased a book, blah, blah, blah. But I am someone who maybe puts down a book sooner, rather. And I that's no detriment to the writer or anything. It's just maybe once you get into something, you didn't quite resonate with it. And then the same way with like TV series, like I might watch first season of a series, but then never watch the next 6. And I think I'm okay with that. So if I'm okay with that, I should be okay with that with books, I think, as well.
Right. And I completely agree. I grew up having to finish every single word of every single book. And as I've gotten older, it's like, well, it might not be the right time in my life to read this. It might not be, just the right thing for me right now. But that's really interesting. Do you also find an interest in like the origins of words and how that how the language has even evolved to this point. We talked about it evolving beyond us now, but like as far as etymology and where things came from.
Oh, absolutely. Like I think etymology is fascinating, and really when you dig down into some of the words, their meanings have either done a completely 180 from where their original meaning, or they might even gone through that 180 and then gone right back to 360 again. So it's like I mean, like, I'm trying to think of an example of other word which has done that, but I think one that just springs to mind right now was the word coroner. We use it now for someone who investigates, essentially dead bodies to figure out, maybe what went wrong and what was the cause of death. But I think I'm going to blank. I don't want to get this completely wrong, but I think it had something to do with coins or something. So yeah, but it's still about the investigation of something like that. But it has now been expanded, and I just thought, oh, that was interesting. And it was a friend who was telling me this, and I thought, oh, that's again just a fascinating. I just find all of this fascinating. That's my problem. It's like I think there's so many rabbit holes and tangents one could go down within language itself, and there are definitely some fascinating people online or in books that are exploring more of the etymology of words and language. It's definitely not my area of expertise. I may sometimes talk about it in some of my videos about how, again, like I said, the words, for instance, incredible and unbelievable.
Yes, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, they technically should mean the same thing. Like, if it's something is credible and you say incredible, it should be unbelievable. But incredible definitely has more of a positive connotation nowadays. If someone says, oh my, that's incredible. So if you're talking about bad news, or you read some bad news, you wouldn't necessarily that's incredible. You'd probably say, oh my God, that's unbelievable. If you're talking, it has a negative connotation.
Right.
And I think that's what's, I've got a great book that I haven't yet read, but it's called Amorous or Loving. And I think that's what's great about, it explores like the history of English, looking at, I think, where our words come from. So we do have an incredible influence from all the way back to Latin, Greek, the Romance languages in general, obviously based in Latin. There's Saxon influence and Germanic influence as well. So we've obviously just pulled in. That's what I love about English. We're just not afraid to pull in or take in words or modulate them. And I think that's what adds to its richness. What I find sometimes funny is that someone will go, oh, I'll use a word, and someone will go, oh, you've used a lot of like French words or something. And I go, actually, they're like, well, if you go further back, they're Latin, or some of them might look Latin, but actually they're Greek. It's just fascinating, I think.
Yes, and I find that really interesting too, because you can, especially in Spanish and French, you can see much more which came from the Greek and which came from the Latin, whether it's because of their gender or just the core of the word. But I try to explain that to my daughter as she's 13 now, but she's very literary herself. But just we were talking about ambidextrous the other night. We'll break it down. What are the parts of the word? Ambi means both, and dexterous comes from dexterity. You have dexterity in both.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I find that like just fascinating to kind of deconstruct and go, oh, look at that. But then what's great about English is sometimes we can take words in a different way, but they're still understandable. So for instance, the plural of octopus, many people might say octopi. I think technically it should be octopodes, because that's like how you form a plural. And I think, I'm going to get this wrong or right or wrong, but I think it's Greek, because I think the I sound is the Latin plural, and we think it's a Latin word, but actually it's a Greek word. And so we've applied a Latin plural to a Greek word, but still we understand it. Or we can say, obviously in English now, we can say octopuses, like that's like the ES or the S plural. We can add that on as well. So all of those ways of saying it are valid. It's just which one you want to use in a way. But some people get they are a bit sticklers for it, the way they go, oh no, you must use the traditional way. And that's fine. Each to their own.
Yes, yeah, it is. And I think it's the people who find it interesting. It's like, you're welcome to dig into it and use the correct word. But then people who don't really want to take the time to figure it out, it's perfectly fine to use the common acceptable version.
Absolutely.
So what's coming up next for you? What are you going to just keep plugging away at your videos? Is there a new project on the horizon?
No, definitely always got irons in the fire. On the English Enjoyed side, I have an idea for another book coming out. It's very much early days, so it's a journey in itself. But it's probably going to be looking at something around either the adjectives and sort of allowing you to be more expressive in the language. So looking at widening your vocabulary, or it might be going down a bit more, looking at what does it actually mean when I talk about what it means to express yourself in formal British English. And maybe looking at that in a bit more concrete manner and sort of breaking it down and saying, using, like I said, maybe not ending a sentence in a preposition. When you do that, it definitely sounds more formal.
Right.
And what other qualities that are unique to British English that can be helpful for learners of the language. Continuation of the videos, hopefully, and the series will continue. I think we've got about another 33 episodes to come out. So that's definitely most of the year taken up in terms of the series side of things. Definitely another series on the horizon. I need to start planning that soon as well, because I want that to be just a continuation of and a branch of English Enjoyed. And then for myself as well, I work, like I said, as a filmmaker and actor. I've got a short film that's going to be hopefully premiering at a festival soon, and then another one, the next one I want to work on, another short film also. And because again, myself I bridge obviously my own writing and then what sits under the English Enjoyed banner, but I have some ideas for novels, more literary fiction.
Awesome.
So that's also in the works as well.
Great. And we'll be sure to put all of your information in the show notes, but where can people find you online?
At English Enjoyed. So English Enjoyed is everywhere across YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, or my website, englishenjoyed.com is where you'll find everything.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really insightful and very much enjoyed talking to you today.
Thank you, Shana. You too. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Growing Inspiration. Please take a moment to subscribe and share with someone who needs to hear this today. To learn more, subscribe to my newsletter at my website, gardenofmydelights.com. I'd love to continue the conversation and hear what you would like to explore next. Find me on Instagram, Facebook, Substack, and YouTube at Garden of My Delights. Until next time, keep nurturing your creativity and looking for beauty and wisdom all around you.